Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Many of you already know me. I'm Diana van Maasdijk, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Equileap. But I think it's always good to present yourself once you get started. So that's me. On behalf of all my colleagues at Equileap, I want to thank you for joining us today. And I also want to thank you for your trust in our data, in our partnership, whether you are a client that is licensing our data, or you are licensing one of the indices that is built with the gender equality ratings of Equileap, or whether you are a supporter of our mission. So today we will share the key conclusions and insights from our latest research, which covers 3,500 public companies in developed markets. As many of you know, our research runs from January to December. This is when we research all the companies in our data set. And then we take the first few months of January and February to clean the data, make sure that it's accurate, validated. So by March, by International Women's Day, we have a new set from the year previous, and we can share with you the key insights of that year. And that's what we're doing today for the developed markets. Our presentation will be approximately 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Please feel free to go ahead and leave your questions as you think about them. After we are done presenting, we will look at the questions and we will start answering them. And as you saw, this presentation is being recorded. You can contact us after the webinar if you would like to have a copy of the presentation to share with some of your colleagues. I will not send the presentation to everyone just like that, but if you contact us and you want a copy of the presentation and the webinar, we can send it to you. So to begin with, I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight Equileap's unique role in the sector, the sustainability and ESG data sector as a social data provider. Could I have the next sheet, please? Right now, we have a data set of 6,000 public companies around the world. We are covering both the emerging markets and the developed markets. And this allows us to cover 85% of the global market capitalization. We have 46 scores, individual scores that we use for the different indicators. And we are measuring already now since last year, not only gender equality, but also racial diversity. This presentation today focuses on gender equality, but there's also a data set for racial diversity covering US companies. And we have 350 metrics, which include cover many of the regulatory frameworks, plus 10 years of historical data. Next sheet, please. So what makes Equileap unique? It really is our rigorous and deliberate data quality assurance process. I know that there are other data providers who will claim that they do hundreds and thousands of companies that they research. We might not do as many companies as some of them say, but we do it really, really well. And we ensure that we maintain our error rate at less than 3%. In fact, some of my staff members have been asking me to put that it's 2%, but we will continue at 3%. This process consists of three different phases. So first, we do our desk research. We use both technology and human capacity to collect the data, to scrape the data from all the publicly available documents and communications from the companies we research. We then have a rigorous quality control, which I will go into a little bit deeper in a bit, that ensures that there's peer reviews, that we find outliers, that we analyze whether what the company is saying is really what they mean. Is it really an anti-sexual harassment policy, or is it just an anti-bullying policy? Now, this quality control happens. And then finally, we have an engagement, a possibility with companies. All companies that get researched by Equileap receive an email with the data that we have researched, and we tell them that they are being scored and that this data will be sold to investors to encourage them to engage with us if there's anything missing. So there are a number of companies that then contact us at this moment and validate the data, and they might say things like, we have more data, but we haven't published it. At that moment, we will say to the companies that we will only take the data that they publish. This again, because Equileap is a social impact company that is trying to close the equality gap in the workplace, and we don't believe that we can do that without transparency and accountability. So in this engagement with the companies, we encourage them to publish this information, and that's when we will take the information. Next sheet, please. So what is also in this quality control and what makes the data that you receive really great is that it is standardized, it's clean, and it's comparable. What we mean is that when the entity is researched and we find the information, we make sure that when we put it on the data set, you can compare apples with apples. So for example, when it comes to leadership, women in leadership, different companies in different countries define leadership differently. They might use terms like the executive suite or the vice presidents or the managers or the managing directors, and they might use these terms interchangeably, making it difficult then to compare what is exactly the leadership level that we're talking about. So at Equileap, we have defined 5 levels for women in the workplace: the board, the executives, the senior managers, and the workforce. And when we research the companies, we look at what the companies mention. And when they're mentioning vice presidents, is that at the management or at the senior management level? So we really analyze the data so that we can find out exactly where the hierarchy is that the company is talking about and where it goes in our standardized method. So that when you receive the data and when we say X% of women are in the senior management, those are the people under the executives, above the managers. The pay gap, for example, is another one. You will hear later on today from my colleague that it's about 44% of companies in the developed markets are publishing the pay gap. But they're publishing all kinds of different figures. They might be publishing equal pay for equal work, or they might be publishing the mean unadjusted pay gap, or they might be publishing for the whole company or for parts of the company. Here again, for the pay gap, Equileap really dissects the data that the company is presenting us, and we standardize it so that you get to see if the number that is being published by the company is the mean, the median, the unadjusted, the adjusted. Is it for the whole company or is it only for parts of the company? So in short, our evaluation process is really consistent across all companies, guided by a robust methodology, and the final data set undergoes a number of checks to ensure that it's also consistent with the historical alignment. The next sheet, please. And a few examples of how people are using our data at this moment. We're very proud. It's 9 years that Equileap has existed. We started with index construction, and now we see many clients using it for ESG integration, strengthening the S, controversy screening, and stakeholder engagement. And the next sheet, please. Now, this is the sheet that many of you know. The reason that I'm sharing it with you is to once again look at the different indicators that fall within our gender equality scorecard. But the ones with the asterisks, if you can see the ones with the asterisks, those are relatively new indicators that at this moment are not being used for the measurement of the scorecard, the rating, but they are really exciting new indicators. 2 of them are extra indicators on the social factors in supply chains. They are looking at whether companies are demanding their suppliers to pay living wages, and whether they are also demanding their suppliers to have an anti-sexual harassment policy. So these, together with our other supply chain indicators, create a very interesting mix of evaluation of exactly how much does the company care when it comes to gender equality, security, safety, and well-being, economic well-being of women in their supply chain. And you'll hear more about that from my colleague later on. Okay, so this concludes our introduction of Equileap, and now what everybody has been waiting for. I'd like to invite my colleague Desideria Benini, who is our Manager of Research and Operations, to please present the key findings from our latest research on developed market companies. Desideria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Diana, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I am Desideria, and I'm the Manager of Research and Operations here at Equileap, where I've been working for the past 4 years. So in the next 25 minutes, I will dive into our findings from our latest yearly research, but I will also touch base on corporate controversies and the rollback against DEI. So starting from our findings, in 2024, we researched 3,547 publicly listed companies with a market cap of more than 2 billion US dollars, listed in a major index across 24 developed markets. Our methodology has a two-step approach, as Diana mentioned earlier. First, we gather publicly available information published by companies, and then we engage with them to validate the data that we have collected. So the main takeaways from our 2025 research are mainly three. So first of all, we have seen a sharp increase in corporate transparency, notably on the gender pay gap and anti-sexual harassment policies. This is mainly due to legislation, as more countries mandate disclosure requirements on important social equality issues. However, while transparency is essential, unfortunately, the numbers show that change is not happening. In some areas, we are even seeing a decline. For example, women's representation across all corporate levels has stagnated, and fewer companies have closed the gender pay gap compared to last year. So now I'd like to start this deep dive from analyzing the top companies and the top countries of our 2025 ranking. So what you see here, it might seem a bit complicated, but actually it's just a neat map showing our country ranking for 2025. So on the left, you see the countries in order of performance. So our top 5 countries are France, tied with Spain, United Kingdom, Italy, and Norway, while at the bottom there is the US, Hong Kong, Israel, and Japan. On the right side, you see their gender equality scores out of 100 that we have calculated based on the evaluation of each single metric in our gender equality scorecard. So even the top scores for France and Spain, as you can see, are 59%. So we are still quite far from perfection, which would be 100. The average score this year for the entire data set is 46%, up from 44 last year. And this is mainly due to an increase in transparency from companies. At the top of the map, you see our 19 gender equality indicators. And then all the colored dots indicate the level of performance. So the green dots represent a great performance. And this is mainly found in policies. So companies usually publish human rights policies, training and career development policies, or supply chain risk management policies. On the other hand, the red dots indicate poor performance. So you can see clearly some bright red lines when it comes to living wage commitments, the gender pay gap, supplier diversity, or gender audits. At the beginning of the map, there is a mix of colors. And this is because there you're seeing the performance of companies when it comes to women's representation across different company levels. And so this really changes depending on the country. This difference between countries is also reflected in the top 10 of this year. You see here the names of the top 10, and it's clear that European and Australian companies are overrepresented in this top 10. And legislation clearly plays a pivotal role in bringing change. So companies in countries with strong legislation on gender equality issues tend to perform better than those with little national regulation. As we'll see later, legislation can also have the opposite effect of undermining change. Something else that's very interesting to notice here is that there is a mix of sectors among the top 10 companies, including industrials, real estate, or even materials. As an example, the top company, Transurban, is a railroad construction company. So this dispels really the myth that only some sector can perform well on gender equality. All companies can succeed if they put the effort in. So we should hold all companies at the same high standard. Although I just said that most sectors figures in the top 10, the financial sector is the most represented, claiming 3 spots: Storebrand, QBE, and Allianz. So in this next slide, you see the top 10 companies for the financial sector specifically. We thought this might be of interest for you. In the sector's ranking, financials ranks 4th, below utilities, communication services, and consumer staples. The worst performing sector, again this year, is information technology, tied with industrials. So now I would like to focus on specific topics related to gender equality that are included in our gender equality scorecard, starting from women's representation. Our 2025 findings show that women's representation in the corporate world has ground to a halt. The representation of women in top corporate roles remains alarmingly low. As you see here, the percentage of women CEOs in 2024 was 7%, and it has remained at 7% in 2025. Similarly, the ratio of women chair of the board was 9% in 2024, and it has remained at 9% in 2025. Even worse, the percentage of women CFOs has declined from 17% last year to 16% this year. When we look at the representation of women in leadership and the workforce globally, again, we see stagnation with no change from last year, except for a slight increase at the board level, as you see, from 30 to 32% this year. But this is likely because a lot of countries have quotas for women on the board. The percentage of women in executive positions has stalled at 22%. The percentage of women in senior management has remained at 27%, while the percentage of women at the workforce at 38%. Of course, there are isolated bright spots. For example, Singapore has increased the percentage of women CFOs this year to reach 40%, which is incredible. However, these exceptions only highlight how far the rest of the world remains. If we take a closer look at the numbers, out of the 3,547 companies that we have researched, only 38 have reached the gender balance at all corporate levels. Gender balance for Equileap means between 40 and 60% women at that specific level. So 38 companies means around 1%. Clearly, there is still a long way to go to achieve true equality. Now, another very important topic that we need to focus on is the gender pay gap. Equileap has 5 different metrics related to the gender pay gap. To look at transparency, so we want to know whether companies have published any pay gap data. To look at performance, so we want to know whether companies have closed their gender pay gap. And one looks at the actions, so what the companies are doing in practice to ensure pay equity. Let's start from transparency. In the last 3 years, indeed, we have seen a great increase in pay gap transparency globally. Disclosures went from 22% in 2023 to 33% in 2024 to 44% in 2025. As you see from this slide, the percentage of companies publishing pay gap data has increased in every world region, but it's definitely most notable in Asia Pacific, where disclosures went from 43% last year to an impressive 74% this year. In Europe, we are close to 60% of companies disclosing their gender pay gap, while the difference with North America is quite striking. Not even 20% of Canadian and US companies publish pay gap data. So now, if we look at country-specific data, it's not a surprise that the US has the lowest gender pay transparency in developed markets, with only 17% of companies disclosing their gaps. Spain continues to be the top performer with 100% disclosures. But what I would really like to focus our attention on are the top improvers, in particular Japan. Disclosures in Japan went from 8% in 2023 to 58% in 2024 to 92% in 2025. Another example can be Australia, where disclosures went from 36% last year to 51% this year. And this really shows the power of legislation, because these great improvements are driven by legal requirements. After we looked at transparency, now is the time to look at performance. So Equileap considers the gender pay gap to be closed when a company's unadjusted mean pay gap is below 3%. So we don't consider the adjusted pay gap, what we usually call equal pay for equal work, but we look at the unadjusted mean, which compares the average salaries of all men in the company with the average salaries of all women in the company. And this is because the unadjusted pay gap analysis is a great tool to see structural inequalities, in particular to recognize whether men are overrepresented in top paid positions. So clearly, without any actions to reach gender balance at the top, we can't see progress on the gender pay gap. Even worse, in 2025, the percentage of companies that have closed their gender pay gap has actually declined. So from 1.1% in 2024 to just 1% in 2025. 1% means 36 companies around the world have closed their gender pay gap. Here again, clearly there is still a long way to go to achieve equality in pay. Another topic that we look at Equileap is sexual harassment. Considering the amount of lawsuits related to sexual harassment that we have recorded over the years, we know the sexual harassment continues to be a problem for women in the workplace. 70% of companies globally publish an anti-sexual harassment policy in 2025. In 2021, this figure was below 50%. So here at Equileap, we really have witnessed great improvements over the years. Spain is leading the way, as you can see from this chart, while surprisingly, Sweden and the United Kingdom are lagging behind. But even in Sweden, which is the worst performer, more than half of the companies publish this policy. So this means that for the first time in 2025, the majority of companies in each separate market publish a policy prohibiting sexual harassment. So this is, of course, very encouraging. The last topic I'd like to focus on is the supply chain. We know that women are disproportionately represented in the lowest tier jobs of supply chains. So working conditions in supply chains are a gendered issue. If companies are committed to gender equality, that they need to extend this commitment to their suppliers. Equileap has 4 indicators that focus on the supply chain. First of all, we look at whether companies publish a supply chain risk management policy, prohibiting child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, or modern slavery. As you can see here, this policy is quite common, as 85% of companies globally manage supply chain risks. Less common is to have a policy that requires suppliers to prohibit sexual harassment. Only 48% of companies in our dataset, up from 40 last year. So here we've definitely seen small improvements. Another important topic related to supply chains is supplier diversity. Only 22% of the companies that we studied have a supplier diversity program, including women-owned businesses. At the top of the list for supplier diversity, there are Canadian and especially US companies. However, it's important to notice that, as Diana explained earlier, these findings are based on last year's data, so 2024. However, we do expect to see a drop here in this in supplier diversity at the end of 2025. So when we're going to look back at this year research, and especially due to the latest political developments in the US. Finally, the least common policy related to supply chains is the one requiring suppliers to pay a living wage to their workers. Only 13% of companies globally have such a policy in place. However, as I said, since women are usually in the lowest paid jobs of supply chains, this kind of policy is extremely important for gender equality. So this marks the end of my presentation around the Equileap 2025 findings. So now I'd like to spend another just 5 minutes talking about workplace controversies and the rollback against DEI. So Equileap tracks 4 types of corporate controversies: legal settlements, official rulings, lawsuits, and what we call other controversies, for example, accusations or open letters. If we record an official ruling, a class action, or two settlements related to gender discrimination against a company, this triggers an alarm bell, meaning that this company is excluded from any financial product using Equileap data for at least 1 year. Since 2026, as I just said, we track gender equality controversies sorted by topic. The topics we look at are the ones that you see on the right. So, for example, we look at pay discrimination, maternity discrimination, sexual harassment, as I just mentioned, or sexist marketing as well. Since 2021, we also track race and ethnic discrimination cases. These are available to interested clients, but they don't trigger an alarm bell. So alarm bells are only focused on gender discrimination. Since 2023, we have recorded more than 800 controversies in total, included 96 settlements and 68 official rulings. We also wanted to point out an alarming trend that we have witnessed recently. And this is the increase in the cases of reverse discrimination. So in 2023, we only recorded one case of reverse discrimination. In 2024, 18 in total, while just in the first few months of 2025, we have recorded 12 already. As a reminder, a reverse discrimination indicates discrimination against members of a dominant or majority group. So, for example, white people or men. So on top of recording corporate controversies, recently we've also started to record any development related to DEI. So the trend against DEI actually started in 2022 with widespread layoffs in big tech, where DEI roles were often the first cut. This is quite hilarious if you think about it, considering then that IT is the sector with the lowest gender equality score. But it's definitely not surprising. As everyone knows, then this rollback has recently accelerated under the Trump administration. So many US companies, including Walmart, Meta, Google, or Tesla, have now scaled back their DEI initiatives. We have recorded 33 so far. At the same time, we've also recorded 18 companies now publicly supporting diversity and inclusion, including, for example, Apple and Costco, whose shareholders have voted against eliminating this kind of initiatives and activities. So we can say that overall companies are reacting in three different ways when it comes to D&I development. There are those who are opposing D&I outright. There are a few who are standing firm. And then there are the majority are those who are quietly scaling back, who are trying to maintain an inclusive narrative. Much of the change is in the language, with terms like diversity being replaced by talent or opportunities. Some key policies that have been removed so far are representational goals for gender and race and ethnicity, supplier diversity, and diverse candidate slates for hiring. So everything considered, transparency is a key concern, as fear of backlash might lead US companies to remove D&I related disclosures. However, as I mentioned earlier, US companies are already the least transparent companies in most topics. So the impact could be minimal. But even more importantly than that, we anticipate that this rollback in the US will be counterbalanced by increased transparency globally, which is driven by new regulations such as the EU CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or Australia's Gender Equality Agency mandates. So we at Equileap, we remain positive, as we know that outside the US, sustainability and DEI are still at the top of the agenda.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Desideria. I never get tired of hearing the findings, regardless of whatever year. Great to hear again that the average score of gender equality companies has raised, but only pretty much due to transparency by 2%, and that actually we are seeing very sad to see the stagnation in women in leaderships, very concerning to see that the pay gap is actually moving backwards. And all of this showing us that gender equality is a key issue when it comes to the S of ESG. Yes, and also the legislation, which seems to be one of the main reasons why we are seeing some progress. But of course, we know that next to legislation, a very powerful tool is investors and investment products. So I would like to ask now my colleague Astrid Ludwig to please give us a presentation on just a few, I think we have 3 or 4 of the indices built with Equileap's gender equality ratings. Most of these indices are up for grabs. Anyone could create a product with them. So Astrid, what do you have to tell us about the indices? Really curious to hear.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much. So hello, my name is Astrid Ludwig. I'm with Equileap now for 5 years, and I will tell you a little bit about our indices. So we have developed over the past years several indices with several index partners. The first one I would like to show you today is an index that we've done with Euronext, focusing on the Eurozone. The way this index works is we have a look at the Eurozone 300 index, which basically captures the 300 biggest companies in the Eurozone. And what we do, we just take the 100 best in terms of gender equality. So the 100 that have the best Equileap score, and do a performance and set an index for this. So what we see here is an outperformance of 7% over the past 10 years, which is really, really a good result. Next slide, please. Thank you. Then I want to show you another index. This one is quite important for us. This index focuses on Japan, and we've built it together with Morningstar. This index is so important for us because the Japanese pension fund has issued a fund link to this index, and there are several billion US dollars invested into this. The concept here is quite different. So this is not a best-in-class index, but it's an index that is weighted according to gender equality. So we take the Morningstar Japan index, and we do not kick out any companies. Instead, we just re-weight it. And what you usually see in these situations is a very, very similar performance, which is also apparent from the graph. But still, even though it's just a reweighting, we still see a 2.5% outperformance since 2016. Thank you, Daisy. Next one, please. Okay. The next index, this is actually my favorite one. I tell you why. This index we built together with Selective, one of our partners, and we focus here on the 1,000 biggest companies in the US. And what we do here, we develop a concept where we tilt the weights of the index. So this is not just a weighting according to Equileap score, but we highly overweight companies that do well in gender equality, and we underweight companies that do poorly. So, and why is this my favorite index? First of all, we have 10% outperformance since 2015 with a lower volatility. But interesting to notice is usually the US indices over the past years have performed very well. Usually because the big tech companies have performed fantastically over the past years. So a Meta, a Google, a Facebook, and so on. So what you have here, those IT companies usually tend to not do super well in terms of gender equality. And despite this fact, still our index outperforms by 10%. Thank you. Next one, please. The next index is the latest one we have built. This one is focusing on emerging markets. So far, we just talked about developed markets, but we also have a data set available for emerging markets. And we've done a backtest since 2019, and we have seen a 29% outperformance. The index is built on the biggest companies in large and mid-cap companies in emerging markets. And this is also a tilting concept. So companies with a good Equileap score are highly overweighted. Companies with a bad Equileap score are highly underweighted. So as we can see in summary, indices with a gender lens tend to outperform. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Astrid. Also one of my favorite slides to look at. But yeah, the financial materiality of gender equality and the stock market is definitely something important. And when companies hear that they are not being included in the indices that we have built, because in that validation process I told you, we contact our companies. We also inform them if they have reached any of these indices or not. That's a very important conversation to have with the companies. And we know that that's a pressure that they feel, and one more tool that investors can use to really promote gender equality at the corporate sector. So yes, this brings us to the end. Next slide, please. I wanted to just discuss the conclusion and the key takeaways before we open to questions. The first one is that data as a catalyst for change. We continue to believe from the time that I co-founded Equileap to today that data is really one of the key, most powerful tools for accountability, for improving corporate transparency and driving meaningful change. And although legislation does play a very strong role to get that data, investors do so too. And we feel that promoting the S and the social within sustainability continues to pressure companies in order for them to be transparent, but also to improve their human capital and gender equality in particular. The second has to do with the business case for gender equality. And here again, it's not only about just putting a few women in leadership positions. There have been other people who have tried to make the case for if you put a couple of women in leadership positions, the company will outperform. We really don't believe that that's true. We believe that a company does better when it really does well on its human capital, both men and women, from the boardroom all the way down to the supply chain. And this is what we've been trying to show with the indices that have been built and with the gender equality scorecard of Equileap, which looks at equality from the board to the supply chain, reinforcing that it is not just about compliance, but also about smart business. And finally, this brings me to the time of today, and I see that some people have asked questions about this too. This is really the time to act. We see a stagnation when it comes to gender equality, to women in the leadership. We see a stagnation when it comes to the pay gap. We know that ESG investing might be under fire in many different ways, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is definitely under fire. So this is definitely the time to act. It reveals that equality shows untapped potential, And this alarming time that we are living now should actually ignite more meaningful change. We don't want to wait 130 years, like the World Bank or the World Economic Forum is telling us we have to wait until we have equality in the workplace. We want this to be faster, and we believe that this is the time that investors can really get encouraged and use our data and our ratings to invest in a way that both aims for social and financial gains. So that was our presentation. Let's now see what kind of questions we have. Desi, I saw a question on the chat, and I think I saw a couple in the Q&A. Which one do you want to take on first?
So we might want to start with the chat because it was the first one that we received. And it's about what we expect from the rollback on D&I if it will make the data collection and comparability more difficult. I think that I partially already answered this question during the presentation, in particular saying that yes, it might be that US companies will reduce their transparency related to some D&I policies, in particular, for example, supplier diversity, or reduce, the percentage of women, like their workplace data published. But at the same time, it's important to notice that already US companies are not very transparent. So this might not really impact our data set as much. And at the same time, for sure, we're going to see an increase in transparency all over the globe, thanks to new legislation coming up literally everywhere, in Europe, in Asia, including Australia, but also Japan, as we have seen, where governments are requiring companies to publish more data.
Yeah.
Definitely this is going to counterbalance this effect.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I don't know, Diana, if you want to share this, but we still see a lot of interest in gender data, despite what is happening in the US, right?
Yeah, thanks. I definitely wanted to say that. Before I mention that, I think when talking to our colleagues who collect the controversies and the D&I, what we've seen that the attack is really at the LGBTQ community and at race and ethnicity. Those are the areas where we can definitely expect that companies will no longer publish targets for hiring of different types of race and ethnicities, targets for getting into leadership, LGBTQ under attack. I think, and the supplier diversity, like you mentioned, I think that things like the actual bums on seats when it comes to gender and women, we will continue to see that. And indeed, despite these attacks against diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have seen in the first quarter of this year quite an uptake of interest in our data. For example, we have 2 new clients interested in our race and ethnicity diversity data and the controversies. If you're interested, contact us. But that has shown more people being interested in it. And we have also seen a number of new funds. Last couple of weeks ago, I was in New York, where there was a new ETF that was launched for the North America in using our data. And we are at this moment talking about a new product in Asia too. So I think that the movement might be slower, but it's still moving forward. Do we have any other questions, Desi or Astrid, that you're seeing in the chat box that you would like to answer?
Yeah, there is one. Yeah, Astrid, I think that's for you about the index.
Astrid, go ahead.
The next one is the index performances. What are the underlying indices for market in general, US and European Equileap index versus market? How does it compare to the S&P, etc.? So the slides we have shown always shows the the base index that we start with. So for example, for the one for Europe, we show the outperformance versus the Eurozone 300 index. For the one in emerging markets, we show the selective large and mid cap index as so directly the comparable index of the starting universe. So the one with the US 1000 shows the Russell 1000 as the example against that we measured.
Okay.
Yeah, but in general, if you would do it with the S&P 500, you would need to calculate those numbers.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I see a question here that the 38 companies that reach gender balance, is there a concentration in sectors? Desi, do you have that top of mind, or do you want to get back to people with that answer?
I definitely need to get back and look at my analysis before answering.
Yeah, but usually I would suspect, since the top 10 are all over and this, but we would have to get back to you. If whoever answered, we will keep a track of who asked this question. We will get back to you. Is there regional concentration in controversies? I believe there is, Desi.
Yeah, definitely there is. And this is due to a couple of reasons. So most of the controversies we record are from the US. And this is due to how like the legal system works in the US versus Europe or Asia, and also how we record controversies. So the way we do it is we scrape, the news to try to find news about lawsuits against publicly listed companies. And so in the US, there is like it's common for this kind of workplace controversies to hit the news. So
Okay.
this is why we're recording loads, while in Europe it's definitely more it's not made public most of the times. But also we know that in the US it's more common to legal battles for workplace discrimination are, generally speaking, more common and more usual. This is why most of them are from the US.
Thank you, Desideria. Yeah, which is actually kind of scary, because it means that there probably are many, many more cases at the workplace of sexual harassment, anti-maternity, discrimination, and so forth, than what we actually are able to capture. I see another interesting question, which I would like to start answering, and then we can post it. Well, we can send it to you, Desi. So when analyzing the pay gap, we're being asked if we adjust for full-time versus part-time. And can we comment on equality and remuneration? What we do is we capture what the company is publishing. Sometimes companies publish an adjusted gender pay gap, which will take into account full-time, part-time. They will take into account seniority, location, and so forth. If that's what the company is publishing, we will capture it and give it the label, this is an adjusted gender pay gap, what this company is publishing. If the company is publishing unadjusted, we will capture that and label it as unadjusted. This way, when you get our data, you get the data and you know what you are seeing. Adjusted, unadjusted, mean, median for the whole company, for parts of the company. So we capture exactly what the company publishes. What do we give a score to? We score positively when the company publishes unadjusted mean, and for overall for the company. And this is for the reasons that Desi presented earlier today, that this really allows you to see what is the average salary a man takes home or a woman takes home when working for this company. Is there a pay gap? That average salary is very important because it builds into your pension, or it doesn't. It gives you your wealth gap and a pension gap. So I will leave it there. We capture all the data, we present all of it, but we give scores for unadjusted mean pay gaps. Okay, do we see any other questions that we wanted to answer at this time?
No, that's all really.
Perfect. Well, so that brings us to the end. Thank you very much, everyone, for having joined us. Please get back to us via email. You can contact us directly, or if you don't have the direct email, at info@equileap.com. It has been, a pleasure to give this webinar. We will do it again in a few hours. And if there is interest, we can also do this for the emerging markets. So do let us know if you found this interesting, if there was anything you were missing, and if you would like us to come back to you with a presentation on the emerging markets data. Okay, well, thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.